Roxanne Love, Love.
Ms. Love, where are you employed?
Currently, I'm employed with the 12th Judicial Circuit, which is Florence Solicitor's Office, which is Florence and Marion County.
What do you do there, ma'am?
I'm an investigator for the Solicitor's Office there.
Now, how long have you done that?
I've been employed with them since January of this year, 2019.
What did you do before that?
Prior to that, I have 30 years of law enforcement experience. I started out with the South Carolina Highway Patrol, worked with the Alcoholic Beverage Control Commission, and then was hired by the State Law Enforcement Division, which is SLED.
And how long did you work for SLED?
For 25 years.
So altogether, how long have you been in law enforcement?
30 years, 30 plus years.
Okay. Now, let's go back in the beginning. What kind of training did you receive to initially become a law enforcement officer?
I went to the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy in Columbia, was certified as a Class 1 officer.
And since then, have you had additional training?
Yes, I've had in investigations, narcotics, things, SWAT training, things of that nature.
Probably too much to list over 30 years.
Yes, sir.
Fair enough. So 30 years in law enforcement, obviously, I'm going to state the obvious, you were employed with SLED back in 2013.
Yes, sir.
And what did you do, what was your title back then?
I was a lieutenant with SLED, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division.
And what did your duties entail as a lieutenant with the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division?
I was a lieutenant in the PD region, which includes Horry County, along with 11 other counties, and my duties included reviewing reports, supervising agents in their cases and caseloads, and also working out in the field on cases and investigations as they would come in at the request of other agencies, such as the city police departments and sheriff departments.
So although SLED is actually a state agency, occasionally local law enforcement agencies would request assistance from y'all.
Yes, sir.
Is that because y'all sometimes specialize in things local law enforcement agencies aren't capable of specializing in?
Yes, we do have units like our lab and behavioral science unit. We have a lot of different units where they are considered, arson unit, where they are considered more specialized. We work regular criminal investigations in the PD region, which would include officer-involved shootings, fraud, criminal sexual conduct, or murders.
Missing persons?
Missing persons, yes, sir.
And I say that to ask you this. Did you have an opportunity or were you asked to assist in the investigation into the disappearance of Heather Ellis?
SLED was requested by the Horry County Police Department to assist them in their investigation.
And did you in fact insist in our investigation?
Yes, we did, myself and 2 other agents at the time.
And what did you do to begin assisting in that investigation, ma'am?
We met with their investigators and were briefed on the facts up to the point that we got involved, which was around January of 2014. And then we assisted with anything that they requested of us in the sense of leads, additional leads, interviews, searches, search warrants, things of that nature.
And specifically, in terms of your role in this investigation, what were you asked to do?
I was asked, we had information that came from the Horry County investigators that Sidney Moore had been to the Walmart on Seaboard Street in Myrtle Beach, which is located in Horry County. So I went there in an attempt to locate surveillance footage of Sidney Moore possibly being at that Walmart on December the 18th.
And when did you actually respond to the Walmart?
I went to that Walmart January the 27th of 2014.
And when you arrived, who did you speak with?
I spoke with their loss prevention agent, Chris Melson, I believe was his name. I met with him and briefed him on what I was looking for, and we began looking at video surveillance footage that they have there at Walmart.
And did Mr. Mason have unfettered access to that surveillance system?
Yes, he did.
And did he grant you access to that surveillance system?
Yes, he did.
So you weren't required to secure a search warrant?
No, sir.
He was very cooperative?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and as you began to look at the video surveillance system, first of all, did you know what you were looking for?
Yes, I did. I had a general idea of the time frame that he was supposed to be, Sidney Moore was supposed to be at that particular Walmart. So generally I like to go back at least to start an hour before, if not a little more, in case the times are off or something like that, to start looking at video footage to see if we could locate him at the store, in the parking lot or in the store.
And you go back an hour just so you don't miss something?
Yes, sir.
And generally speaking, and I know it's been a long time, what was your time frame?
I believe what we were told, it was around midnight or a little after, so that's kind of where I requested for the viewing to start of their video surveillance footage.
And about how much video surveillance footage did you actually view?
Well, we had to look at a good bit because we had to go from camera to camera at different times. And I can't recall exactly how much I looked at, but I know we started a minimum of an hour before, so, you know, I would have been looking at a minimum of an hour of video surveillance footage before we actually were able to locate Sidney Moore coming into that Walmart.
But you did locate Sidney Moore coming into Walmart?
Yes, sir, we did.
And that was on what date?
December the 18th of 2013.
And tell me a little bit about what you saw in terms of, and when you say Mr. Moore, you mean the defendant sitting over there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about what you saw on the video as far as it concerns Mr. Moore.
You can see his vehicle entering the parking lot, parking in a handicap parking space, entering the front of the Walmart, and then purchasing some items, checking out, exiting the Walmart, and then departing the park, re-entering his vehicle and departing the parking lot.
Ma'am, I'm showing you now what's been marked for identification purposes only. It states Exhibit 60. I want you to take a look at that envelope. Open it up if you need to. Take a look inside that envelope and tell me if you know what that is.
That is the DVD recording of the surveillance footage that I recovered from the Walmart at Seaboard Street.
And is that the footage, the entire footage of Mr. Moore inside that Walmart? Well, parking and going inside the Walmart and then exiting?
Yes, sir, it is.
And that is the entirety of that footage
Yes, sir.
as it concerns Mr. Moore?
Yes, sir.
And you watched it?
Yes, sir.
Has it been tampered with in any way, shape, or form?
No, sir.
Your Honor, at this time I would seek to interstate 60 into evidence.
Is there any objection? Without objection, state 60 is admitted.
Permission to publish, Your Honor.
Yes, sir, you may.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Love, you said you saw Mr. Moore's vehicle enter the Walmart, parking lot of the Walmart. Did you know what he drove before you were looking?
Yes, sir. I knew he drove a Ford F-150.
So, as you were looking for the video surveillance footage, you had a pretty good idea of what you were looking for. You were briefed pretty well.
Yes, sir.
Were you aware of, did you have a description of Mr. Moore himself?
Yes, I did.
And I want to make sure, Ms. Love, that you can see that screen too, so tell me if you can.
I can.
And if you don't mind, just kind of narrate this thing for me, and I'll be quiet. I'll let you tell us what you see.
At the top of the parking lot there is Sidney Moore's vehicle coming into the Walmart parking lot.
What time is this?
I believe that's around 1:12 a.m.
On December 18th?
December the 18th, 2013.
And that's his vehicle?
That is his truck, his F-150,
What color does that truck appear to be, ma'am?
black. That's just another angle of the same, of him pulling into the Walmart parking lot.
Okay. Get another angle?
Yes, sir. And he's parking his vehicle. That's a handicap parking space. You can see Sidney Moore beginning to exit his vehicle. That's him walking into the entrance of the Walmart. That's Sidney Moore entering the Walmart. He has a Sticky Fingers t-shirt on with a toboggan-type cap.
Would you say his pants are light colored?
Light colored, khaki-ish tan.
What section of the store are we in right here?
That is like where the beauty supplies and things of that nature are, I guess the pharmacy side of Walmart.
Okay.
And he appears he's looking for an item there. It appears that he can't locate it, so he'll end up talking to an associate there. That's him with the associate. He appears to have picked up an item, goes to the cash register.
Can you tell what item he just picked up right there?
I cannot tell what the item is right there.
Okay. Do you know what he's doing now?
He is he's talking to an associate or is he waiting on an associate to check out at the cash register.
Fair enough.
At this point, he's asking for an item behind the counter from the associate.
What's she doing there? What's she counting out there?
She is checking him out at this point. The two items that he had purchased. And then he hands her change for the two items that he's purchasing.
Okay.
She's counting out the money that the change that he's just given her. And then hands her additional money to finish checking out.
She hand him a receipt right there?
She does. Then that is Sidney Moore exiting the Walmart and returning to his vehicle. That's his tail lights. Sidney Moore then enters his vehicle and he'll eventually begin to back out and depart the parking lot.
Right there, Miss Love, how many taillights can you count?
3.
3?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
So that's 2 on either side of the truck and 1 on the top?
Yes, sir. Sidney Moore then backs out of his parking place and exits the parking lot.
Thank you, Tim. Tell me this, let's talk just a little bit more. I know it's kind of self-explanatory, but I want to make sure we get all the nuances. When Sidney walks in, does he browse around the Walmart?
No, it appears he knows what he's looking for when he gets there.
So he doesn't go to the sporting goods section,
No, sir.
the menswear section,
No, sir.
or the outdoor section?
No, sir.
He goes straight to one section of the store.
Yes, sir.
And then does He looked for something, does it appear?
It appears he's looking for something, can't find it, ends up talking with an associate.
Does that associate escort him to a particular aisle?
Yes, sir, she does. And then he picks up the item he was looking for and then proceeds to the cash register.
And it appears he bought how many items in total from that Walmart?
2 items
And paid how?
with change. With cash.
Did it appear that he received any change back from the cashier?
He did not.
Ma'am, I'm showing you now what's been marked for identification only, it's State's Exhibit 62. I'd like you to take a look at that.
Yes, sir. It's the receipt that I obtained from Walmart of the purchase that Sidney Moore made on December the 18th of 2013.
And how did you obtain that receipt?
Chris Mason was able to go into their system and pull me a copy of it.
And he handed it to you directly?
Yes, sir.
And you provided it to my office?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And has it been tampered with in any way, shape, or form?
No, sir.
Your Honor, seek to tender State 62 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, sir, Your Honor.
Without objection, it is submitted.
Ma'am, I want you to take a look one more time at State's 62 and tell me if the 2 items that Mr. Moore purchased are itemized on that receipt.
They are.
And what specifically were those 2 items?
He purchased a pregnancy test and a Swisher Sweet little cigar.
So Swisher Sweet and a pregnancy test. Now, tell me how much the Swisher Sweets were.
They were $3.63.
And how much was that pregnancy test?
88 cents.
88 cents.
Yes, sir.
And he paid how?
With cash. Change, actually, it looks like on the video, but
One more time, can you just briefly describe the kind of clothes he was wearing?
he was wearing a, appeared to be burgundy-ish colored sticky finger t-shirt, and the tannish khaki-looking cargo pants.
So light colored pants?
I'm sorry, what?
Were they light colored?
Yes, sir, they were light in color.
Just one more thing, ma'am. Take a look one more time at State 62. Ms. Miller, I'm going to ask you to step down so I can borrow your steady hand one more time. Is there a date on that receipt?
Yes, sir, it is.
Tell me the date on that receipt.
December the 18th, 2013.
And is there a time on that receipt?
Yes, sir, there is.
Tell this jury what time those items were purchased from that Walmart.
At 1 a.m. and 19 seconds. Well, at 1:19 a.m. and 43 seconds.
1:19 a.m. Ms. Love, if you will, please answer any questions the defense may have.
May cross-examine the call.
Ms. Love, when did you say you were brought on to this investigation?
In January of 2014.
Do you have a specific date?
We were requested on January the 15th, I believe it was, of 2014, and I believe the first day I was there was January 21st, I believe, of 2014, but somewhere thereabouts.
Do you know the date that Horry County Police first found Miss Elvis' automobile?
Not off the top of my head, I do not recall the date that they found her automobile.
Okay. If I said it,
But it's probably close in proximity to her going missing, I believe.
do you know that date?
December the 18th, 2013 is the incident date.
So SLED was officially brought into the investigation. You said she went missing on December the 18th and SLED was brought in January 15th. Is that correct?
That's when the PD region was requested for assistance, yes, sir.
All right. And you were brought into the case approximately a week after that, on the 21st of June.
Well, that's when I was able to be there, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, let's talk about SLED for a minute. You said that SLED has different departments and they support the local agencies. And I think you said that one department was the arson department and another department was the behavioral sciences unit.
Yes, sir.
Okay, what department from SLED were you assigned to?
I'm in the PD region. SLED has 4 regions. They include the Midlands, the Upstate, Low Country, and the PD region. The PD region is composed of 12 counties, which we service for assistance when requested. And we could be requested for numerous things as far as criminal investigations or manpower. It could be a natural disaster or a big event that they're needing our assistance with.
Okay, so when you said that you were brought into the case, you were brought in as a representative from the PD region?
Yes, sir. And our unit is a investigative unit.
Investigative unit. Okay, was the behavioral sciences unit also brought into this case?
Yes, sir. I believe they did assist some in the investigation. Yes, sir.
And that would have been under the supervision of Lieutenant Bo Barton from SLED?
Yeah, it would have just been him. Yeah, I think it was just him. Well, yes, sir.
Okay, so you're a lieutenant working with SLED, he's a lieutenant working with SLED. Were there any other SLED agents assigned in this case?
Yes, Randy Truss and James Johnson were agents that assisted. They're from the PD region, Randy and James.
So we have 3 PD region SLED agents, and we have 1 BSU SLED lieutenant assigned in this case. 4 SLED agents total.
Yes, sir, and there were other agents that would come and assist when needed, but yes, sir.
Okay, so there are more than 4 SLED agents assigned to the case.
That would assist when we needed the manpower or something, yes, sir.
Right. Now, how long did you work at SLED again?
25 years.
25 years. Are you familiar with the unit called the Fusion Center?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell the jury what the Fusion Center does?
Some of what they do, the Fusion Center is a unit at SLED, and they have analysts. They answer the phones during non-core hours, which would be after 5 and before 8:30. They can run anywhere from DMVs, tags. They can do searches for you if you're looking for someone, and they're responsible for after hours, making sure if an agency requests a crime scene unit, getting those units to their the areas that they need to respond to.
Do they do computer-related stuff also?
Yes, sir.
Okay, like cell phone extractions?
We also have a computer crime unit, and they do cell extractions. I don't think the Fusion Center does cell extractions themselves.
Okay. SLED has the capacity to do cell phone extraction.
Yes, sir.
And SLED does those on a regular basis.
Yes, sir.
What about computers such as laptops, desktops? SLED also has the capacity to extract the data off of them.
Yes, sir. Our computer crimes unit would handle that.
Right. Now, I think you said you were in the investigative unit.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, I think your testimony is that you collected the video and you collected the receipt.
Yes, sir.
Okay. What other work did you do on this case?
We assisted with interviews. We helped with searches, search warrants, followed up on leads, looked at video footage, things of that nature.
Did you conduct any interviews?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay, who did you?
Or assisted. I assisted with some of the interviews at the Tilted Kilt. Those are the ones I recall the most.
Did you interview any of the Moore family?
Yes, sir. I interviewed Tammy Moore's mother. I think her name, I can't remember her first name, but her last name is Kaysen.
Did you interview any of the Moore children?
No, sir, I did not.
Other than interviews, did you dust for fingerprints?
No, sir.
Did you take pictures of Miss Elvis's car?
No, sir.
Did you take pictures of Miss Elvis's apartment?
No, sir.
Did you collect any DNA evidence in this case?
No, sir, I did not.
Now, the information that you did provide to this jury, the video and the receipt, I think it's my understanding that you already had the time frame that you were looking for on the video?
Yes,
Correct?
yes, sir.
And how is it that you came by that information?
We were provided that by Horry County investigators.
Okay. Do you know how Horry County came by that information?
If I'm not mistaken, they conducted an interview with Sidney Moore, and he provided them with some of that information.
So he told them that he was at Walmart.
Yes, sir, best I can remember, yes, sir.
Okay. And he told them that he was making a purchase of a pregnancy test.
I believe so, yes, sir.
Okay, so what you did with this TV was just go back and give us what we already knew. Correct?
What that did was corroborate what information we had been provided.
You corroborated Mr. Moore's version of events in that regard.
For that moment, yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. No further questions.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may come down if you wish to switch to be excused, sir.
Please, sir.
Any objections, Mr. Martin?
No, sir.
You're also free to leave, so thank you. Call your next witness, please.
Your Honor, this time the state calls Detective Brian Wilson.
Raise your right hand, place your left hand on the Bible. You solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you're about to give the court in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
State your full name and spell your last name.
Brian Wilson, W-I-L-S-O-N,
Mr. Wilson, where you work?
Horry County Police,
How long you been there?
14 years,
What's your rank?
detective.
And as a detective, generally speaking, real quick, what do your duties entail?
We do in-depth investigations of crimes.
Fair enough. What kind of training did you do to become a detective?
Well, I went to the Law Enforcement Academy in Columbia and had some regional training as well.
You always undergo training constantly every year?
Yes.
Nope. What was your position back in 2013, December of 2013?
I was a detective.
So you've been a detective a long time.
Yeah.
Did you have an opportunity to assist on the case that we're all here for today?
I did.
And how did you become involved in this case?
I was given the task to find video. There's a receipt found in a car at McDonald's, and I was given the task to go try to find surveillance video from that McDonald's. While I was out doing that task, I was given a phone call saying that they had developed information about a phone call that came from a possible payphone at a location in the city of Myrtle Beach. I went there and collected that video.
Can you tell us what location you went to?
It was a gas station, I don't know if it's Kangaroo, Circle K, right there at the corner of Mr. Joe White and Seaboard.
Is that down the road from Walmart?
It's up the road.
Up the road from Walmart?
Yeah.
Is it in the vicinity of a Walmart?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so when did you go and investigate this payphone video?
I believe it's the 20th of December.
Of 2013.
Yes.
And when you got there, what'd you encounter?
Was able to see that the place had several different video cameras. One that pointed to a payphone that was on the side of the building.
Now, the only one pointed to the payphone?
Yes.
Okay. Were you able to learn what the Kangaroo's hours were?
Yes.
Tell me about the hours.
They were, I believe at the time, open 24 hours a day.
Okay. So the payphone was available to everybody 24/7?
Yeah, it was on the outside of the building.
Oh, okay. So you knew you were looking for video from that specific payphone?
Yes.
And were you able to make contact with someone that granted you access to watch the video?
Yeah, the manager.
And did he make you get a search warrant?
No.
So he was just cooperative with you?
Yes, he was.
And did he actually let you watch video?
He did.
What did you learn from watching video?
Well, the video was not the best quality, but you could see in the time frame I was given, somebody walked from the Seaboard side to the payphone and was on the payphone for approximately 5 minutes and then leaves the way he came back into the parking lot.
Let's talk about that. The time frame you were given. What time frame were you given, generally speaking?
I believe it was between 1 and 2 a.m.
So you looked for video between that time frame,
Yes,
and you did in fact secure video,
I did.
and you did in fact witness someone during that time frame use the payphone.
Yes,
How many people during that time frame used the payphone?
one.
And you secured that video from the manager?
I did.
Tell me just a little bit more before we go any further about that video. Before the person walks from Seaboard Street, you say,
Yes.
to the payphone, do you see anything else?
You see a car, a vehicle come up Seaboard, and it appears that they do kind of, they turn around because you see the headlights flash across the parking lot where the payphone is.
Okay.
And you don't see it leave. And then several seconds later, you see the person come from that side.
Tell me this, the payphone itself, is it in a phone booth?
No, it's mounted to the side of the building.
Is it in an alley?
No,
So it's in an open area?
correct.
And in front of that payphone, what do you have?
Really nothing. There's parking lot,
Parking lot.
the side of the building, parking lot.
Spaces for cars to park.
Absolutely.
Now in this video, between 1 and 2 a.m., how many cars were parked in front of this payphone?
None.
So there was space available in front of this payphone to park?
Yes.
Tight space, like compact car space?
No, I believe the dumpsters are on that side of the building and the back of the building. So obviously there's enough room for a dump or a garbage truck to pick up the trash cans.
And how many cars were in that parking lot when this payphone was used?
0.
I'm showing you now what's been marked for identification purposes only as State's Exhibit 61. I want you to take a look at that, take a look at what's in it, and tell this jury if you know what it is.
Is the video that I initialed, that was the video I got from the gas station?
Is that the video surveillance footage you acquired from that gas station?
Yes, it is.
And does that encompass what you were looking for that night?
It does.
Has it been tampered with in any way?
No,
And you've seen that video?
I have.
How do you know you've seen that video?
It's got my initials on it.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, I would seek to introduce State 61 in evidence.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
Without objection, state 61 is admitted.
Permission to publish.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. I want to ask this, Detective, while she's doing that. You said the video is not the best quality.
Yes.
Can you make out, it is definitely a person on the video?
Yeah.
Tell me what you can make out about the person on the video.
The only thing you can make out is they're wearing some sort of dark colored shirt, sweater, long sleeve, and lighter colored pants.
All right, lighter color pants.
Yeah.
Okay. And do you, well, we'll get to that. Please. Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can.
Well, just kind of narrate it for us. You've seen it more times than I have. You tell us what we see when we see it.
Okay. As you can see in the top part of the video, it come up like it's a vehicle coming up Seaboard towards 10th Avenue or Mr. Joe White.
Okay?
You can see how the headlights flash on that side of the parking lot.
I do.
Right there.
I do. What's across the street of Seaboard Street from this gas station?
It's a commercial building.
Is it open this time now?
No, it's not. And in the video, the vehicle, that headlights turn in there, you don't see it go back the opposite way on Seaboard.
So although it appears to turn around, you don't see it go back down Seaboard Street?
Correct.
When you say up and down Seaboard Street, what direction was the vehicle coming from?
It was coming from 501 towards Mr. Joe White Avenue, like coming north.
And where's the Walmart?
It's south of here. We're facing the direction of Walmart.
So it was coming from the direction of Walmart?
Correct.
Okay.
And now you see a person come across the video right to the pavement.
And it appears you said a dark top and a light bottom.
Yeah, like, the quality of the video is not the greatest, so.
And right here, obviously, the person appears to be using the payphone.
Correct.
Since there's no audio, go ahead and tell us about how long does this person use this payphone for?
Approximately 5 minutes.
During the course of this 5 minutes, detective, do you see anybody else, any other person on this video?
No. And as you can tell, at the time of the night, there's not very much traffic coming up Seaboard Street.
To the best of your knowledge, is that pretty common this time of night on in that area of Myrtle Beach?
Yes.
Detective, tell me this, while we're waiting and watching. Across the street where you said there's a commercial building, are there any big impediments blocking a view from that building to this payphone?
Not that I remember.
No big trees,
There's a couple trees along the side of the road, but they're small.
so you can see through them to the payphone?
Yes.
It's a silly question, but no walls?
No.
Tell me what I'm looking at.
The person who is on the phone is now exiting across the parking lot the same way they came in.
Towards Seaboard Street?
Yes.
Those cars I'm seeing pass by, they're on Seaboard Street?
Yes. The camera angle is 10th Avenue is behind you, and you're looking right down, for the most part, of Seaboard Street.
This parking lot of this gas station here, it appears to be well lit, am I correct?
Yes.
Do you see the person anymore on this video today?
No.
So again, recap what we just saw. We see a car come from the direction of the Walmart.
Correct.
Fill in the blanks, go ahead.
The vehicle comes traveling north on Seaboard Street. As the headlights appear to flash in the side parking lot, and does not go back the opposite direction of Seaboard Street, which it came. And several seconds later, the person comes to the payphone, is there about a little over 5 minutes, I believe, and exits the same way.
And the person's general clothing, I know some word of it is
A dark
top.
and lighter pants.
Do you know what time that was? Do you know exactly what time that phone call was made on that video?
Not exactly, it was around 1:30.
Okay. Ms. Miller, if you don't mind. I'm telling y'all, if I write it, you'll never read it. And what date was that on?
I'm not 100% on what date it was. I collected on the 20th.
Okay. You collected it on the 20th, okay. But what time was it on? Was it
Roughly 1:30 in the morning.
1:30? I want another, thank you, Ms. Miller. I want to ask you another question.
Sure.
The Walmart in relation to where this payphone is. Here, let's do it this way. We'll use the big map. I'm showing you now what's been entered into evidence is state, good Lord, 56.
Okay.
And here, I'll just hold it up here for you, Your Honor, if you don't mind, for a second. Can you point out to me where the gas station that payphone is located, is that on this map?
It is right here.
And I know it's probably not marked up here, but generally, where's the Walmart on Seaboard Street?
Right here.
Okay, and the truck drove what route? Or not the truck, the vehicle that you saw on the video?
It was coming from this direction.
Towards the, okay. And let me ask you this question. That Walmart, about how far is that Walmart from that Kangaroo gas station?
I'd say probably right around a mile, maybe.
How long would it take you to drive to that gas station from that Walmart going down Seaboard Street?
Probably less than 5 minutes, I'd imagine.
Less than 5 minutes. Less than 5 minutes. Did you do anything else after you collected that video, Detective Wilson, to help in this investigation?
I was part of a consent search of the Moore's house.
When did that happen?
I believe the next day,
The next day?
on the 21st maybe.
Okay. And what did you do to assist in that search?
I was there with Lieutenant Sester and Lieutenant Squires.
With the Horry County Police Department?
Correct.
Okay. And you say a consent to search. Tell the jury what that means exactly.
They have given us consent to search their home at that point, which, they gave us permission to go in their home.
So you didn't have a search warrant at that time?
No, we did not.
Okay. So when you got there, who was present at the Moore's house?
It was Tammy and her parents.
Okay. And who actually gave you consent to search?
Tammy,
And how long were you at the house?
maybe an hour.
And when you got there, was Sidney there?
No,
Do you know where he was?
he was at our M.L. Brown building.
Okay. What did you notice? Did you seize anything first of all at the house?
No,
Okay. Did you notice anything of possible evidentiary value while you were at the house?
when we were walking up to the front door, we saw there were surveillance cameras outside.
Did that pique your interest?
Yes,
Why?
because it would capture anything that would possibly have gone on.
When you say surveillance cameras, multiple cameras,
Yes,
where did they appear to be aimed at?
mainly their driveway, their front yard area.
Did they appear to be in good working order?
Yes,
But again, you didn't have a warrant to seize those cameras at that time?
no, we did not.
Did you see any vehicles in the driveway?
I don't recall any vehicles being there.
Let me ask you this, when you saw those cameras and you took note of them, of being possible evidentiary value, did your department then secure a search warrant later for those cameras?
I believe so, yes.
And did y'all go back to seize those cameras?
Yes,
And were you able to seize those cameras?
I was not part of that part of it.
All right, please answer the question.
I will.
May cross-examine. Sure, absolutely.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Now, this was, just so we get our timelines right, this voluntary consent to search occurred on the 20th, is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay. So Ms. Moore goes missing the early morning of the 18th. Are you aware of any interaction between Mr. Moore and law enforcement between the 18th and when you went to his residence on the 20th?
That day we encountered him. Mr. Moore was at the police department when we went to the home.
All right, so we're now on the 20th, so this is approximately 48 hours after the first report of Miss Elvis being missing, correct?
Yes.
And by this point, Officer Calderwood, Officer Scales, and Officer Canterbury have all appeared at the Moore residence prior to your arrival, correct?
Correct.
All right. And you have now, let me withdraw that. At this point, Sidney is already being questioned at the M.L. Brown police station, correct?
Yes.
And while he's at the M.L. Brown building being questioned, you are requesting a search of his home, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did you seek to take possession of any items that you found during that consent to search?
No.
Okay. Is it safe to say that since you did not ask for custody or possession of any of those items, there was nothing that, other than what you mentioned a moment ago, that would be of evidentiary value that you saw at that time?
Correct.
Okay, and again, this is in the, like I said, about 48 hours after she went missing, correct?
Yes.
And you're trained as a detective to notice various items that would appear suspicious under these circumstances, correct?
Yes.
All right. Again, just, I think it goes without saying, but you notice no items that perceived or that you believe to be related to Heather Ellis in their home, correct?
Correct.
I imagine as you went to the residence, did you notice a truck?
I did not.
Did not see a truck?
No.
Okay. So you didn't notice any other, anything that, at least from best you could tell at that time, would indicate a link between Mr. Moore and Mr. Ellis?
No.
And did you prepare a report in this investigation?
I did.
In just a moment. Sure. Office. Like I said, you prepared a report in this case, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you recall in that report if you ever indicated that you saw these surveillance videos?
I did not.
Okay. Now, and again, that's something you would have done, close in time to your involvement, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, subsequent to that, you had a lot of conversations with other investigators and with the solicitor's office, correct?
I per se didn't, but after the initial couple of days, they took some of us off the investigation because they were focusing on other agencies helping out with it.
Right. At this point, actually, when you went to the Moore residence, it was you and Lieutenant Stair, is that
Yes.
correct? Okay, so actually 2 of you went at this point.
3.
3 of you.
Yes.
While Sidney was at the M.L. Brown building, 3 of you went and asked Ms. Moore to search.
Correct.
Okay. Now, again, at that time, you did not ask to take possession of these surveillance videos that you say you saw, correct?
Correct.
Right. And again, in your report that was prepared contemporaneous with your observation, you did not note any surveillance footage at that time, correct?
No.
But after subsequent discussions and subsequent preparations for this case, you now remember that those surveillance videos were in place. Is that your testimony?
Yes.
Okay. Nothing further, Mr. Whiteshaw.
Redirect.
Yes, sir. So Mr. Boucher is absolutely correct. The consent to search was actually done on the 20th,
Yes.
not the 21st.
Correct.
Okay, the day before. And that's what I thought. So it was on the 20th that you actually saw the surveillance cameras up in the Moore's house.
Yes.
And subsequent to that, and y'all didn't seize them at that point?
No.
Okay. Subsequent to that, your department sought a search warrant for those cameras.
Correct.
So somebody thought there were some evidentiary value.
Correct.
Okay. But you weren't part of the group that went back to execute that warrant later?
No.
So you don't know if those same cameras were seized or not?
Correct.
Okay. Tell me about the truck that Mr. Boucher asked you about. Is it, because you didn't seem real sure, is it possible there was a vehicle in the driveway and you don't recall?
I don't recall.
No further questions.
Recross.
Very briefly, you were asked if you if you seized these cameras, and you didn't, right?
Mm.
But I asked you a moment ago,
No.
No,
but when I asked you a moment ago, you actually didn't even ask if you could take possession of those, correct?
yeah, we did not,
You did not ask.
no,
Because you're there you're there at the allowance of the Moores, correct?
yes,
They allowed you to come into their home to search, right?
yes,
And there's nothing stopping you from saying, ma'am, can I look at the video surveillance from these?
yes, correct,
Okay. And again, you're sure that they were there at that time?
yes,
Okay. Even though it's not reported in your report?
correct,
Okay. Now, after 6 years later, and after a conversation with the solicitor's office, you're sure that it's there?
yes,
Okay. But again, you didn't undertake any efforts to ask for possession of those records, correct?
correct.
All right, so you may come down. You wish the witness to be excused?
File these, Your Honor, please.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
You're free to leave. Thank you. Call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, the state called Mike Melson. Thanks, Brian.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you're about to give the court in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes.
Please state your full name and spell your last name.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Michael Melson, M as in Mary, E-L-S-O-N.
And Mike, if you don't mind, tell this jury where you're from.
I'm from Dallas, Texas area.
And if you don't mind, tell them where you're currently employed.
I am employed at a company called Hawk Analytics. It's a company that I founded and am CEO of.
Okay? And if you don't mind, tell them what your company does. What did you find? What did you create?
It's a software company. I wrote the software. It analyzes cell phone records to help understand what they say during investigations.
Okay? And what does the software analyze?
Specifically, we analyze call detail records that are provided from cell phone companies.
Okay, and tell this crowd a little bit about your background. What did you do before you founded Hawk Analytics?
Well, I've always been in the software industry in some form or fashion. My schooling's in software, both a bachelor's and a master's degree. My first job was actually on the space shuttle working on the flight software. After that, I went to work as a contractor for one of the cell phone companies in the early days. Spent about 3 or 4 years working on the billing software that digested these types of records and created phone bills.
And if you don't mind, tell them how many police agencies use your software.
Well, we have police agencies as well as private sector. We've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 customers. About 85% of those are law enforcement.
Okay, and if you don't mind, tell them a little bit about how many times you've testified. Before you tell them that, do you teach as well?
Yes, part of the service we provide is teaching people how to understand and analyze these records.
And how long have you been teaching?
Probably 4 years.
Okay. And have you ever testified in court?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and have you been qualified as an expert?
Yes, ma'am.
And what were you qualified as an expert in?
So historical cellular records analysis.
Okay. Now, before we get too far into what you did in this case, does your software do anything to alter the records at all?
We try and keep that to a minimum, but there are some situations where the work product that we put out from our software will differ slightly. One of the most important ones to understand are the timestamps. These records aren't always in Eastern time zones. So for instance, in the Sprint records, we will have Eastern as well as maybe Central. T-Mobile, sometimes it's something called UTC. So we'll normalize those so that we can look at them in a timeline that makes sense. We also standardize some of the fields so that instead of a 0, we might say incoming so that it's more readable.
Okay. Now, I should have asked you this before. When you were qualified, what court were you qualified in?
In this court, twice I believe.
Okay, and in circuit court?
Yes,
Okay, and that was in cellular technology and historical records analysis.
correct.
And does that entail basically mapping out the phone records?
Yes, we do several types of analysis, mapping them to understand locations as well as who's talking to whom, that type of thing.
Your Honor, at this time, the state wishes to offer Mr. Melson as an expert in cellular technology and historical records analysis.
No objection, sir.
Excuse me.
No objection.
Very well, I'll give you a written opinions in those areas.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Melson, what phone numbers did you do? Hold on 1 second. What phone numbers did you analyze the records for this case?
The phone numbers were related to a phone that was associated with Mr. Moore, Mrs. Moore, and Heather Elvis. One ended in 7-4, I believe that was Mrs. Moore's. 7-5 was Mr. Moore's, and Heather's phone.
Okay. And tell this jury a little bit first about your analysis. What did you look at? What did you find?
Mhm. What we look for are things that can help us understand what's going on through these records in the area of locations. Now, these records don't contain the exact location of the phone. What they tell us is the antenna that was used. So that can give us a general area where the phone may have been. So we look at it from a location analysis perspective. We look at it from a connections perspective. Who they talk to first, last, most on a particular date at a particular time. And then the last thing is what we teach is pattern of life or our normal routine. Our phones are with us almost all the time and they document what's normal for us. So we look at what the normal patterns were in the usages of these phones, and then did those patterns change? Was there any difference? And see if we can understand a little bit more about why those patterns might have changed.
Okay. And did you do a report to help explain your analysis to the court and this jury?
Yes, I did.
Okay. I'm showing you now just what Mr. Galmore was looking through. It's State's Exhibit 63 and 64. And if you don't mind, take a look at it and tell this court what it is.
State's Exhibit 63 is a printout of the report, the PowerPoint presentation that I put together.
Okay. And would this assist you in explaining what you found from their phone records? From
Yes, ma'am.
Heather's, Sidney, and Tammy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Your Honor, this time the state wishes to put 63 into evidence and publish it to the jury.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Without objection, it's admitted.
Before I publish this, I want to ask you so the jury knows what to expect. Are we going to be able to tell at certain times where Heather's phone is in relationship to the defendant's?
We will be able to tell in a general area, and I'll explain what that means. So, yes, we will be able to see if they are in the same general area or on opposite sides of town.
Now, earlier, you weren't in here, but Mr. Galmore was asking some questions to Mr. Martin. Are you going to be able to give the exact location of the phone?
No, these records do not contain the location of the phone. What we do have is the exact location of the antenna that the phone used, and I'll certainly explain a little bit more about why it used that antenna. We can determine the general area that the phone was likely in, but the actual location of the phone is not in these records.
So give us just 1 minute. And if you don't mind, just get a drink of water. Tell this jury when you got to Horry County.
I flew in today. I got here about 2:30.
So you had to go straight from the airport to here?
Yes, ma'am.
It's taking me 1 minute.
It's a large file.
Mr. Melson, if you don't mind stepping down just to go through the report with
Yes,
it and show us what your analysis of the record shows. I'm gonna let you stand over here near the microphone a minute.
Okay, is there some way to
I gotta
advance?
make it
Nancy, is her
Can we just stand on this side?
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just so we're clear, this is Tammy's phone, the defendant, and the victim.
Correct.
Okay, take this through.
Yes, ma'am. All right, this slide just documents all the different files that I analyzed for the record. They are the same printouts that you may have seen. They're the actual raw data from, in the case of Mr. and Mrs. Moore's phone, Sprint, and then T-Mobile's records for Heather's phone. During the analysis, Mrs. Moore's phone will be on either pink or purple, and I'll keep pointing that out as we go through. Mr. Moore's is blue or green, and Ms. Elvis will be in red. We're talking about these call detail records. It's something that I certainly look at every day, but you probably haven't. So let me just show you what they look like and what's in them and why we care. Where they come from is every time anybody uses their cell phone or a mobile device, the phone company writes this down. They write down what they did. They record it so they can improve their network. They also record it so that they can send us phone bills. So this is an example of one of the Sprint records. What we have, and it's the same, it will look a little different, it's formatted different, but it's the same type of data in the T-Mobile report. The first thing we would have is who called whom. So if it's a voice message, a voice call or a text message, who initiated it and who received it. We have when it started, how long it lasted, and then we have some numbers that give us the cell tower that was used at the very start of the call. And that's important. The phone may use other towers, but this is the tower that was selected at the very beginning of the call. Those numbers, actually, then we have to go look up in another spreadsheet that was listed on there. What we find out is what I mentioned. We find those numbers and we get a latitude and longitude, the GPS coordinates of the actual cell tower that you would see out there. The other piece of information is something called an azimuth. If you've ever noticed, those towers have 3 sides. Well, instead of one antenna broadcasting its signal in a full circle, like maybe an incandescent light bulb in a living room, these antennas are designed to project a signal in one direction only, more like a spotlight or a flashlight. And they'll put 3 of them on the tower so that they can cover the 3 sides more effectively. So what we know is, for instance, in this case, the particular antenna that was used is pointing due south from that tower. Now, we're going to be looking at some maps when we're talking about locations. And I said there are 3 types of analysis we'll do, so this only applies to locations. What we'll show you is the antenna is at the tip of that wedge shape, okay? The graphic symbol points due south to simply show you the direction the antenna is facing at that location. In fact, if we take a look, we can actually switch to satellite view and see that there's an antenna there. And I do that regularly to make sure that these graphic symbols are accurate, that there's actually an antenna there. One thing that's important to point out here, the only thing we know is where the antenna is and which way it faces. We don't know the actual area that it covers. These graphic symbols are not intended to show any coverage area. So please do not think the phone has to be inside that little shaded area. The phone can be anywhere, most likely in the general area out in front, okay? So we're just showing the location and direction. We know that it's projecting its best area to the south. In this case, this was a record that was about 11:20 at night. It's Mr. Moore's phone. It's very likely that he could have been at home or his phone could have, and so it's perfectly reasonable that that would be the antenna used because it's providing the best signal in the area of his home. Let me just talk. best really quickly. The phones do not always pick the closest antenna. Often they do, but the phones don't know where the antennas are. They're listening to all the antennas all the time, and they're picking ones that have a best signal. All these antennas are sending a signal every so often. And our phones monitor those so they can tell, oh, I like that one, it's loudest and clearest, or I like that one, it's loudest and clearest. The phone is the only thing listening. The phone is the only thing that determines which is the first tower used. The network actually doesn't know which tower the phone is going to connect to when we have that written down here as first, okay? So it's just the best signal. And that's why it's chosen. We have a second type of records from Sprint here. They're very similar to the first. They have all the same information as the first records do. There are a couple differences. One, we will often have more of these records because that first file from Sprint is billing data. So if it's not a billable call, we may not know about it, a dropped call, that type thing. This second report contains more of the records that wouldn't have shown up in the billing report. So that's the first thing. We may see things in here that we wouldn't have in the first file. The second thing that we have when it starts, how long it lasts, the identifier of the antenna that was used, so we can determine where that is and which way it faces. We have two additional pieces of information in this report that are very useful. First is a distance measurement. That's actually the distance that the phone was measured to be from that antenna when the call started. They do this because these signals travel at the speed of light. And so if you can time how long it takes for the signal to leave the tower and get to the phone, you can turn that into a distance measurement. So it's a timing, kind of like a sonar beam. The next thing is an estimated phone location. The engineers came up with their best guess, if you will, of where the phone was when this started. So those are the additional pieces of information in this other type of data. On the maps, what you'll see, we'll have that same graphic symbol to show you where the antenna is and which way it faces. This curved line is drawn at the distance the phone was measured to be from the antenna. These are quite often, about 70–80% of the time, within a couple hundred meters of being correct. I know.
I'm sorry, just briefly, so I understand before you get too far in front of me. Now that we have a distance, that does give us a better idea of where that phone is within the sector.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. What we would expect is that not only the phone would be out in this general area, but somewhere near that curved line. There's a dot where the engineer thought the phone was, and this line simply just lets us find that dot a little more easily. So in this case, it would be very reasonable that this would be a record consistent with the phone being at Mr. Moore's residence. You see the distance line goes right over top of the residence, and the engineers estimated the phone to be very close to there. So we'll look at these as well. Okay. And again, just to document, that's based on a timing signal there that they turn into a distance for us. When it comes to looking at the location records, we'll use this map. There are some areas of interest that are marked on here just so you can get your reference. The Moore's residence at the time here, the Elvis residence at the time here, the boat landing, Tilted Kilt, Walmart, the phone booth, a Longbeard's restaurant up in this area here, as well as a Sticky Fingers restaurant over there by the airport. So all those graphic symbols will be shown on this map. Now, that's for location analysis. The next type of analysis we'll take a look at, and we're about to get into the records, is who's calling whom. So we'll use this type of a display. That's a timeline along the left. The three phones are at the top, and this will simply show that, for instance, Tammy Moore's phone called Sidney's Moore's phone at this time. And we have then the details of those calls. So let's start with that type of an analysis, this common calls. Here are all of the calls between Tammy Moore's phone in pink, starting from the beginning of the records I was provided, which was actually March 1st, 2013. And we have the records clear through the end of that year. So we've got 10 months of data on these phones. Mr. Moore's phone is green. So every time you see a pink arrow, it's either a voice or text message from her phone to his phone. A green arrow is one from his phone to hers. Why we look at this is we see that there's a very normal routine that started at the beginning of the data and continued very consistently. Like a lot of married couples, they're communicating back and forth on a daily basis up until beginning of November. This is that type of change that we're looking for. There's a distinct change in the pattern in these records, their normal routine change. So we want to dig into that a little bit more and see if we can understand what happened on or around November 2nd.
Now, Mr. Melson, before you get too far, did you also look at how much phone activity was between the defendant and the victim?
Yes.
Okay, tell us about that.
So that's coming up here. We'll add the victim's phone in. This red phone is Heather's phone. And so now what we're seeing are calls that involve Heather's phone with either Mr. Moore's or Miss Moore's phone. We see a very clear start of communication between Mr. Moore and Miss Elvis' phone in July. It continues fairly consistently until about that same time, November 2nd. Then their communications stop as well.
No, one second, let me ask you. So this is the contact between the defendant and the victim?
Correct. Yes.
This is the contact between the defendant and his wife?
Correct.
Would you agree there's more white space here than over here?
Yes.
What does that mean?
We can see that during this time, the communication from Mr. Moore's phone to Ms. Moore's phone has tailed off slightly, so he's not reaching out to Tammy quite as much during those late stages.
And he's clearly reaching out more to the victim.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. What we're going to do is just zoom in on November 2nd and take a look at the communications between these three phones on the early morning hours. So this is that same chart, but we've zoomed all the way into just the 2nd, and in fact, just midnight to 2 a.m. What we have are two communications, either voice or text, from Heather Elvis' phone to Mr. Moore's phone early that morning, about 12:20 time frame. There's a return communication, either voice or text, from Mr. Moore's phone. And then within a few minutes, we see that Tammy Moore's phone actually places a phone call to Heather Elvis' phone. That's the first time in the entire prior 8 months of data that we've seen a communication between Tammy's phone and Heather's phone.
Do you ever see Heather reach out to Tammy?
No, there's no documentation, no documented records of a reverse call between those two phones. That first call from Tammy Moore's phone was at 12:45 a.m. It was placed to Heather's phone. It lasted for 39 seconds, which is an indication that the call probably did not go to voicemail, but was in fact answered. There were two people who talked using those two phones. After that very brief conversation, there were two more, either voice or text from Mr. Moore's phone to Heather's phone. One more attempt from Tammy's phone to Heather's phone, which only lasted 7 seconds. So there was likely no conversation at that time. Several more attempts from Mr. Moore's phone in the next hour to Heather's phone as well.
Let me ask you real quick, just so I'm clear. You do include the month of December, at least a portion of it, is that right?
We will zoom out. This is just in the 2 hours on the morning, midnight to 2 a.m. Now what we'll do is zoom out. Before we do that, this simply shows that during this time, Mr. Moore's phone and Mrs. Moore's phone were both using the exact same towers that would be consistent with them being at their home. So they are both in the same general area, these phones are. It doesn't prove that they're together, but they are certainly using the towers that are consistent with the phones being at home while this communication is going on during these 2 hours.
So hold on, so while Tammy calls and he calls Heather Elvis, both of them are together at home, or both phones are together at
Both
home?
phones are using the exact same tower.
Okay.
So they are both in the same coverage area of that tower.
Okay.
Now, we've zoomed back out just a little bit. We zoomed way into just the 2 hours. Now we're zooming out from just November 2nd through the end of December. So we do see now for the next month what happened. Here is that second call from Tammy's phone to Heather's. We see the communication then. These lines across here, may be hard to see, but the shaded lines represent the weekend now. So we've got Saturday and Sunday. This happened at about 12:30 in the morning on a Friday night, Saturday morning. For the next 48 hours, we see communication back and forth during the next 2 days between Mr. Moore's phone and Ms. Elvis' phone. After that, a day and a half later, we see one attempt from Heather's phone to Mr. Moore's phone. And then a few weeks later, another communication from Miss Elvis' phone to Mr. Moore's phone. And then we have a month and a half where there's no communication records between those two phones at all. The next time that we see any communication is in the early morning hours of December 18th, when Heather's phone calls Mr. Moore's phone again. We'll look at those particular days in more detail.
Let me ask you this. In December, did it look like Tammy and the defendant had gotten back to their normal pattern?
No. As you can see, I'm sorry, you said Tammy and Sidney?
Yes.
Yeah, we see that they do not pick up their normal back and forth communications. Of course, the records don't explain why, but they document that constant daily communication of voice and text messages back and forth did not pick back up at any time.
Okay, thank you.
When we see that November 2nd clearly created a substantial change in all three of these people's calling patterns, their normal routine that they'd been going on for months just abruptly changed. Well, then what I want to do is see, did that transfer over into their normal routine as it pertains to locations? In other words, they changed who they're calling, did they change where they were going before that date and after? And so this is what we're looking at here. These are the top towers used during all the records that I had available from November 2nd previous, so up until that time. And these are the top locations that Mr. Moore's phone frequented during that time. After that November 2nd early morning exchange of calls, when their calling patterns changed, from that point forward, here are the top locations, the top towers that his phone connected to. What we see is, prior to November 2nd, he spent more time up the coast toward North Myrtle Beach. Those towers are no longer, he may use them on occasion, but they're no longer in his top 10. So his interest in terms of location did switch, did change. We saw a shift away from that northern area on and around November 2nd. Heather Elvis' phone, prior to that 11/2 morning, these were her top towers. And afterward, we see a couple changes. We see a distinct drop in interest along the coastal area up north here. We see a development of an interest here, and I do believe that she had moved during the November timeframe to the apartment down here. So that would be consistent with that. But we have this drop in activity up here. We also did the same with Mrs. Moore's phone, Tammy Moore's phone, before November 2nd. That was her area of interest. After November 2nd, not a significant difference, but we did see some interest develop in this northern area. So since this area seems to be where all three of their phones changed their routine, I wanted to go look for what we call proximity events. In other words, were there 2 or 3 of these phones together? In other words, using the same towers or nearby towers within a reasonable amount of time? Could we place them in the same general area? Prior to November 2nd, on July 22nd, at 12:16 a.m., we have Mr. Moore's phone represented in blue here. So these are the antennas he used. His call started here and ended here. It was a 131-second phone call. That puts his phone in the general area probably between these two towers. Okay. The call at 12:16 a.m. was to Heather's phone. Heather's phone, when she received that call, used the tower here. The reason this symbol is a little different, a circle instead of the pie slice, is because we don't have an azimuth. So we don't know which side of the antenna, or of that tower her phone was on. We just know it was certainly not out in the ocean, so somewhere in this general area as well. So we have both phones in that same area while one is calling the other. That's July 22nd, 12:16 a.m. A few weeks later, on August 2nd at 11:06 p.m., we see a very similar thing again. Mr. Moore's phone was used to call Miss Elvis' phone. It was a 49-second call. His phone used a tower here, which would put him in this general area. She used these two towers, which would put her in this general area. So both phones were up in that same general area while one called the other at 11 p.m. on August 2nd. A few hours later, this is actually just past midnight, 1:40 a.m. on the 3rd, we have another call where, in this case, it's from Heather's phone to Mr. Moore's phone. This call was a longer call, 11 minutes. Heather's phone started the call on this tower up here. 11 minutes later, the call ended down here, which indicates that she was traveling down the coast during that 11-minute phone call. Her call was to Mr. Moore's phone, which stayed up in this general area during that 11 minutes. Again, on the 16th, Mr. Moore and Miss Elvis' phone, 2:53 a.m. His phone was in this general area. Her phone was there. Heather's phone called Sidney's. It was a 3-minute call. Now again, I looked for all common proximity events between any 2 or more of these 3 phones. I did not find Tammy's phone calling Mr. Moore or Miss Elvis any time up here. So if it had been, we would show it here. The only proximity events that we have are between Sidney and Heather Elvis' phone before November 2nd. September 4th again, 3:17 p.m. Heather's phone calls Sidney's phone, almost 6 minutes. Both phones are using towers very close to each other for those calls. October 8th, 9 p.m., Heather's phone, almost a 3-minute phone call to Mr. Moore's phone. Again, towers that are in the immediate vicinity of each other, placing the phones in the same general area, which would include being together during that time. October 11th, Mr. Moore placed 2 calls, one at 9:42 a.m., one at 9:43. Heather Elvis' phone used this tower, putting her up in this area. Mr. Moore's phone actually sequenced through towers that indicated his phone was traveling up the coast, heading up this way during those calls. All right, we're going to look at what about the proximity events. When were either 2 or more of these phones together in the same area after November 2nd? On 11/4, just a few days after that exchange that we saw in the early morning hours, we have Heather's phone at 9 p.m. up here. We then have Tammy's phone in the North Myrtle Beach area at 11:20. And then 2 hours later at 1:20 the next morning, Heather's phone is again up here. So this is the only time so far that I saw Tammy's phone and Heather's phone up in this north area at generally the same time on the November 4th. November 6th, we actually have all 3 phones. We start with Tammy's phone, 624 and 626, using first an antenna here facing this way. That puts her down here. Then here this way, that brings her up here. So she's moving up the coast. Within a minute or 2, we have Mr. Moore's phone using towers just slightly up the coast. So this would be consistent with the phones traveling together. They were both using towers next to each other within a few minutes of each other. Mrs. Moore's phone, 7:30 North Myrtle Beach, 7:50. It's up here, putting it in this general area. This would be consistent, for instance, with the drive around here or even coming just back down this way. And then we end at 8:02 with her phone heading back toward Myrtle Beach proper. Within an hour and a half of both Mr. and Mrs. Moore's phones being up in this area, we see that Heather's phone is up here as well. Again, on November 9th, all 3 phones are up here. Multiple calls through this antenna by Mrs. Moore's phone. And then we see Sidney and Tammy's phone both use the exact same tower within seconds of each other, which would mean that they were both in the same general area, and it certainly would include being together, as it appears at least Tammy's phone is heading back down the coast. And then within 30 minutes, we see that Heather was up in this area, or at least her phone was in this general area as well. All right. Those are all the proximity events that we had up there. What we saw then in the records are from 11/21 to 12/12. Records actually documented a road trip that went from here to Las Vegas, then to Disneyland and back. So Mr. and Mrs. Moore's phones were out of state. In looking at the records, the phones likely arrived no earlier than the evening hours of December 11th, no later than the morning hours of December 12th. So Then when we pick up, once the phones are back in town, on the 12th, around 8 to 8:37 p.m., we actually see all 3 phones in the general area of Myrtle Beach.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Melson. The 12th is when they first arrived back in Horry County.
Correct.
So after that cross-country trip, they come back. Now, Heather's phone, this consistent with her being at home?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And these phones here, are they consistent with being in the area of Broadway at the beach and Myrtle Beach?
Yes. This is projecting its best signal here, so we would expect that Mr. Moore's phone would be in this general area at 8 p.m. Heather's phone, 8:04 at 8:37, this general area, which would include Broadway at the beach as well. Not unreasonable for this antenna to be used from a phone at Broadway at the beach.
So as soon as they get back from California, they literally drive into town on the 12th, correct? They get right over here by Myrtle Beach around Broadway at the beach, is that right?
Yes,
And when they're over here, our victim is in the area of her home.
correct.
Just wanted to make sure I was clear.
Yes, ma'am. All right. Between the 12th and the 17th, there really wasn't any other significant time that we see the phones near each other. So we'll just move forward now to the 17th and 18th. These are obviously critical dates in this case. So we're going to switch format here just a little bit. Same map. I've got a timeline across the top. These little boxes up here each represent 1 hour of the day. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at not just when the phones were next to each other, but all of the movements of these phones during these 48 hours. To try and speed things up, we'll take most of the 17th from midnight to 9:14 p.m. Starting during that time frame, Mr. Moore's phone only used the antenna by his home. You see all these distances are down around the residence. Even all the estimated locations are down here. This is very consistent with him being home or near his home for most of the day, at least until 9:14. We didn't have very much information on Tammy's phone during that time. We had 4 records, about 1 a.m. and 4 p.m. But during those times, all of them were consistent with being in the general vicinity of the Grove as well. Heather roamed around town a little bit in the afternoon. Not much significant other than documenting that she did drive around Myrtle Beach and south of there a bit. At 9:29, we now see Mr. Moore's phone move. So he's no longer at his residence. He's now using this antenna. This is the one that has the distance. So not only is he probably in this general area, he's likely somewhere along this curved line. If he's in the phone's moving toward the east, so could be on Carolina Bays, could be down here. We're looking for routes of travel. Very reasonable to think that he'd be right in this general area. But the phone is no longer in the area of the residence. That's at 9:29. Between 9:38 and 9:53, the phone, Mr. Moore's phone, only uses this antenna, which is facing directly at Broadway at the beach. And in fact, our distances are right over the Broadway at the beach area. So his phone is somewhere in this general area at this time, which would include being around Broadway at the beach.
Just briefly, the victim's phone is not located in that area at that time, correct?
We don't have any records on the victim's phone at this time. We do have one at 10:03. This is Heather Elvis' phone. The map's changed a little bit to show she recorded using a tower down in Garden City area during that time. So she was not anywhere in the Myrtle Beach area around 10 p.m. She was down the coast of ways. Going back to Mr. Moore's phone and the timeline, looking at really all 3 phones, between 10:12 and 10:51, we actually see 2 towers used by Mr. and Mrs. Moore's phones at the same time. Most of them are used by Mr. Moore's phone. We have 4 records from Tammy's phone as well. These distances end up putting the phone somewhere right around in between these towers. So this would be an area where the sticky fingers is just, northeast of the airport, right in that general area. But these phones are probably stationary during that time, right in the general area to the northeast of the airport. From 10:52 to 10:59, we're going to see a sequence of changes here that indicate movement. So instead of using these 2 towers, Mr. Moore's phone now is using a different set of antennas facing a different direction off the same tower. So it's showing that his phone is probably starting to move. The distance arc puts him somewhere out here. So he could be over here, here, here. All of those are possible. But we watch those estimated locations, and what we see is that there's a trending heading this way as the phone appears to stay the same distance from the tower. So we're not heading away, we're tending to stay the same distance heading this way. Next, we sequence to a different tower, which confirms that we're seeing movement to the northeast along this way.
And just so I'm clear, this here is where the victim was living at the time?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, when I look at these type of records, I see distinct indications of movement from the southwest up toward the northeast. So then I look at possible routes of travel along here. We have two that are obvious that would get the phone moving this way: River Oaks Drive and 17. Now you'll notice the antennas that were consistently selected were facing River Oaks Drive. They weren't facing 17. If the phone were heading 17, we would expect the antennas pointing at 17 to be selected. And not once were they. So we do know the phone's moving this way. These records tend to be more consistent with the phone coming up River Oaks than 17. I'm assuming that it wasn't in a boat going up the intercoastal waterway. That would work too. This is a very interesting set of records here. This is from 11:03 to 11:06 p.m. Mr. and Mrs. Moore's phones. During a 3-minute time frame, we have close to 10 records. So regardless of how the phones moved, when we have the distances from two different towers, literally drawing an X on the map, that's a very strong indication that the phone was in this area right here. That's the area that does include the Longbeards area. It's that general area around there. So Mr. and Mrs. Moore's phones both ended up right in this area during this 3 minutes. So however they got from down here to here, this is where they ended up. Okay? Records are pretty strong in that. They were there briefly. We maybe have 5 minutes that we couldn't account for before Mr. Moore's phone is using an antenna here at 11:22, heading this way. So they've left this area, they're somehow up here, perhaps along Carolina Forest Boulevard, perhaps along 31, but they're up here this way, and we quickly understand that where they end up within 10 minutes after that is up in the area of the university. So for the next little over an hour, we have quite a bit of activity between both phones from 11:32 to 12:38, all concentrated right up around the university. So both phones were together, or certainly in the same immediate area of the university for a little over an hour during this time. The locations changed and we see that there's a difference again. So anytime we start seeing new towers, we've got to assume that the phone is now detecting this is the best signal instead of this. Well, the most logical reason why this now has the best signal is because the phone's moved closer to it. So this is Tammy's phone at 12:39, having switched from liking that antenna to this one, and likely being up here. Mr. Moore's phone is using the same towers within minutes of Tammy's phone as well. So Tammy and Sidney's phone, both in the same general area at the same time. When we see the antenna switch from the northwest to the southeast side of the tower, that's consistent with these phones coming down 501 toward Myrtle Beach area. So they've passed that cell site and they're moving on down. We then see the exact same pattern that we saw around 10:30, 10:50 in the prior evening. So wherever they were before in this general area, it looks like they may well have returned to it. We have Mr. Moore's phone only at that particular time, but we saw that Mrs. Moore's phone was traveling with him coming down 501. Now, 1:12 a.m. to 1:14 a.m. And there's a phone call from a phone booth at 1:35 a.m. I believe it is, so we're going to spend a little more time looking at what's going on around this time. We're going to see a sequence of records here. May be hard to see, but watch those distance arcs and the dots as I sequence through multiple calls within just 30 seconds. The distances and the estimated locations are moving toward the antenna. That shows this phone's on the move again, most likely. And then we see within a very short time after that, 15 seconds, it's actually moved into an area where another antenna has the best signal. So it's moved enough to where a different antenna is giving it its best signal. We're going to zoom in on those particular records so we can study them a little better. So we saw the phone moving toward the antenna and now wrapping around probably to the north, but very close to that cell site, and switching to this side. So this means the phone's moved from that side of the antenna over here. We see our distance arcs. It's actually inside the shape. And again, these don't represent coverage areas, so the phone can be anywhere over here, probably around this distance. We're at 112.56, and then we actually see quite a few usages of this same antenna within minutes of each other, right around 1:14 a.m. That distance is actually consistent with being in the general area of the Walmart at this time. And within 15 minutes of those 114 records from Sidney Moore's phone, we see that Tammy's phone is using the exact same tower as well. So this confirms that they're continuing to be in the same general area, if not together.
And if you don't mind, Mr. Melson, I'm going to put up the phone records so we can look at those as you're showing us the location.
At 1:29 to 1:30, we have a few more of Mr. Moore's records in use. The distances are going to start being very consistent with each other. So it's putting the phone somewhere in this general area, which would certainly include the location of the phone booth. Now, here is a call at 1:35 a.m. It's to Heather's phone. It comes from phone number 444-2462, which my understanding is the phone number of the phone booth.
Yes, sir. So just so the jury can keep up with here, so now we're at this first payphone call to the victim at 1:33 a.m. Where is she in the area when she receives that phone call?
1:35 a.m.
1:35?
Yeah.
Didn't know.
Heather's phone is using the antenna that we know provides service to a residence. This doesn't prove she's at a residence, but if she were at a residence, she would use this antenna. We do know she's in the general area of a residence, if not there. She's not anywhere down here in Myrtle Beach. And at that same time, we're going to see Mr. Moore's phone consistently painting this same distance using this same antenna. Now this call lasted almost 5 minutes, so that's an indication that two people using these two phone numbers talked. Right? This wasn't a voicemail, it wasn't a hang-up. 5-minute durations generally indicate that two people talked. That record started at 1:35. It was just shy of 5 minutes. At 1:39 through 1:40, right at the end of that phone call, we still see Mr. Moore's phone using the same antenna facing this way, providing general coverage out here, and the distance measured is very consistently painting right here. Now, just a few minutes later, Heather does place an outgoing phone call to a different number, again using the antenna that provides service in the area of the residence.
So at 1:44 is the call to Brianna.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and she's in the area of her home.
Yes.
Okay, now where is the defendant? Do we know, or his
We don't
phone?
know. We've got no data, no records, no phone calls at this point for several hours on either Mr. Moore's or Mrs. Moore's phones. Those last ones right at the end of the phone booth call are the last ones we have of theirs for a while.
Okay, so what do we see next on Heather's phone?
So after the call to her friend at 1:44, between 2:29 and 2:30, we see two calls also using the antenna by her residence. Both of these calls are to the phone booth number.
Okay, and again, she's still in the area of her home?
Yes, I would expect that she's still at home, if not in the immediate vicinity.
And there is nothing on the Moore's phone?
No.
No use of the Moore's phone to know where
Correct.
their phone?
We don't have any indication of where the Moore's phones might be at this time.
Okay, now let me ask you this. Earlier, Mr. Galmore was asking about being on the internet on the phone or data. Did we have any data information from the defendant?
From the defendant, no. I'm sorry, from the defendant. From the victim's phone, no. On the defendant, those distance arcs that we see, when we have those distance arcs, sometimes those might be data connections. This was old enough that there wasn't quite as much data usage as we see now. The predominant records we have are voice and text on the defendant's phone.
So during this time frame, there's no phone, text, or any data connection from the defendant?
Correct.
Okay.
All right, so 2:29 and 2:30 a.m., within a minute or so of each other, Heather places outbound phone calls to the phone booth. Both of those are very short duration, so there was no phone, nobody answered, no conversation that went on. At 2:32, Heather uses a different tower. This would be consistent with the phone moving. We would expect, since the tower is to the east of her last tower, that the phone's probably moving somewhere in the general easterly direction away from her residence. This call again, as her phone is leaving the residence, heading somewhere generally to the east.
And who is that phone
She
call
calls
to?
the phone number of the phone booth again. So
Okay.
this is a third call back to the phone booth. Okay, we're going to zoom back out. This is the same call, just zooming the map back out so we can continue on now with the broader view. To show that roughly 21 minutes later, Heather made a total of 6 calls starting at 2:43 a.m. and lasting over the course of about 21 minutes until 3:05 a.m. All 6 of those calls, I know you can't see it, they're just documented for the record down there. All 6 of those were outbound calls from her phone to the phone booth number. None were answered.
Let me ask you this. Where is the defendant's phone at this time?
We know that the phone is using the antenna that's right here, facing south. That puts her in this general area here. We can't say any more specifically than that.
Okay, how about the defendant? Do we know where his phone is during this time?
No records whatsoever, so we have no idea where his phone may be.
Okay. So for at least an hour and 15 minutes, we have no information on the defendant's phone.
Correct.
Okay. And during that same time frame is when we see the victim's phone leave home and go to this area around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Correct.
Okay.
And from that area, she places a total of 6 phone calls back to the phone booth. And this is that same general area where those distance arcs place Mr. and Mrs. Moore's phone at 11:06 p.m. Approximately, what would that be, 4 hours earlier?
Objection, relevant?
Overruled, if you admitted, does he explain?
I mean, he's explaining where
Mr.
the,
Gall, you
Yeah.
have an opportunity to cross-examine him. You can
Thank
ask a question. The document's been admitted. It's relevant. Thank you, sir.
Go ahead, Mr. Melson.
At 3:16 p.m., we have Heather's phone back using the antenna that would be consistent, providing coverage to the area, including her residence. So she's gone back that direction. Whether she's home or not, we can't tell from the records, but this is consistent with going back home. She makes 2 calls at this time. We're showing the first one here. In this case, the phone call is to Mr. Moore's old cell phone number, the 3175 number. So she places a phone call to Mr. Moore's phone, and then within a minute or so, she places a second one to Mr. Moore's phone. Both of hers use the antenna consistent with her being at home. Both of his were received through an antenna and distances consistent with his phone being at home. Now, when I dig into the nitty-gritty details of this, the first call, these numbers here are documented in Sprint's documentation that very first phone call went to voicemail. So the first attempt was not answered. It went to Mr. Moore's phone voicemail. The second call actually resulted in about a 4.5-minute phone call. So the second call appears that 2 people talked. So the first one went to voicemail, second one, 2 people talked. Then the last records that we have from Heather's phone were at the 3:38 to 3:41. That would be roughly 20 minutes later. 4 phone calls are placed through Heather's phone. They enter T-Mobile's network here on this antenna, and all 4 of those calls reach Mr. Moore's phone through the antenna that's consistent with his phone still being at the residence.
So after the call at 3:17, she left her home and went to the area of Peachtree Lane?
She went into the coverage area where this was providing the best signal. That's all we can tell from the records. What I can say is that it's reasonable that that would also include the landing.
Okay, thank you.
Now, the other thing that was interesting to note on these records, if you've ever called someone and it rings and rings and rings and then goes to voicemail because they just didn't have their phone with them or chose to, not answer it, you will actually, if you time it, it will ring about 25 or 30 seconds before you roll over to voicemail. In all 4 of these calls, the records do document with that same code that they all 4 ended up going to Mr. Moore's voicemail, but all 4 of them lasted 26 seconds before they went there. What this is indicative of is the phone ringing, but no one actually touching it during that time. Okay. The last thing that we have, we're going to just quickly time-lapse all 3 of these records during these last 2 days. We're actually going to pick up at that 9:30 p.m. record where Mr. Moore's phone appears to have left the residence heading toward downtown Myrtle Beach. What we're going to watch is a time-lapse where 1 second here in the courtroom will actually show us 5 minutes worth of all these records. So it'll move fairly quickly. I'll try and explain as we go through. But we see Mr. Moore's phone in the area that would include Broadway at the beach. Down here, this is around 10 p.m. 10:15, we see using the towers, he and Tammy, that are consistent with being to the northwest area of the airport, northeast, I'm sorry. We see that wrapping around this area over in this general vicinity, and then Mr. Moore's phone, as both the phones end up at the university. We then see multiple records repeatedly in use on that same antenna up there, reporting very consistent distances. This is what we see when a phone's generally not moving much. Now we see the phones leave there just after midnight, 12:50. We're down here seeing the same pattern in this area. We then see the move over to this general area. There's the phone booth phone call originally. There are the call to the friend. Now we have the additional phone booth calls as the phone moves up to this general area, repeatedly ringing the phone booth before it heads back, calls Mr. Moore's phone twice, and then 4 times from the tower by the landing.
Thank you, Mr. Melson. No further questions for this witness.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Melson.
I anticipate, Mr. Dalton, your examination is probably going to be some length to it, I would think, would it not, sir?
Yes.
I'm going to take a break at this point, ladies and gentlemen, let you go to your jury, and do not continue deliberations. We'll be with you in about 15 minutes.